Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending and being interested in cannabis versus climate change. That is my topic, and what initially introduced me to the idea of cannabis and climate change was an article that I read. I don't know if you can see that. It's about the aerosol loading over the boreal forests, and this is from Science magazine in 2006. So, December 2005, Science magazine. And so the title is High Natural Aerosol Loading Over Boreal Forests. And what that refers to is the monoterpene content of the atmosphere. And that's determined by the boreal forests and the phytoplankton in the oceans, because both the boreal forests and the phytoplankton exude monoterpenes into the atmosphere at the same time that they sequester carbon and contribute oxygen and other things to the atmosphere. But uniquely, they contribute vast quantities of monoterpenes, which I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with, because if you had a salad or salad dressing with basil in it, for instance, the smell from the basil that is so enticing is mostly monoterpenes. And the smell of a pine forest, the characteristic scent, is mostly monoterpenes, about 92% monoterpenes, and sesquiterpenes and other things. But what's unique about the monoterpenes in the atmosphere is that they actually rise up into the stratosphere and serve like little mirrors to reflect radiation, solar radiation, away from the planet. They actually refract it like a crystal. And they also nucleate persistent cloud formation that does the same thing. It protects the planet from the sun. Well, in the last 60 years or so, about 50% of the boreal forests have been cut down mostly to make paper. It's a big mistake, and it has damaged the shield that the Earth has naturally developed eons, millions of years, billions of years, to protect the planet from the sun. So the plants and the phytoplankton participate in the systemic relationships in many ways, but in particular, they contribute to shielding us from increasing UVB radiation. And that is the concern. The increasing UVB radiation, it's been reported that it's gone up about 6%, but from what I can tell, in just going online and accessing the databases for the National Science Foundation, where they publicly make available the readings from the land-based monitoring equipment, you can go and see what the UV radiance was at any one of several locations on the Earth for the last 20 years. It's fascinating. It's disturbing when you consider that in the investigations that I did, I found that there was about a 118% increase in the frequency of radiation in San Diego, California, which is the monitoring station that I looked at for the last 20 years. And the number of days that the UV levels are in the extreme range, where you will burn in 10 minutes. And it does affect us on many levels. 118% increase in 20 years is a blink in the eye of geologic time. And what's happening is we're seeing the indicator species dying off because they can't adjust to the increasing radiation. And some of those indicator species are the ones that make the monoterpenes. Now, what does this all have to do with cannabis? Well, the good news is that cannabis produces what's been characterized as a mountain of monoterpenes. 58 monoterpenes from cannabis. Cannabis is the only agricultural resource that can replace what's been lost with the death of the boreal forests and the death of the phytoplankton as well. They're about 40% gone. With the quantity of monoterpenes needed to shield the earth from the sun. Full stop. It's our choice. We either shield ourselves from the sun by expanding the arable base and planting cannabis everywhere we can on the planet, and pray it's not too late. I mean, the limiting factor in the equation of survival is time. We don't know how many growing seasons we have left. To waste a growing season is a horrible crime against future generations. They're going to be wondering what the hell we were thinking, because we aren't growing cannabis everywhere we can. Now, I've talked with the Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Tom Vilsack, is a very nice man. I talked with his chief advisor, Mr. Robert Bonney, at the United States Department of Agriculture, and I told them about this information, and so far I haven't gotten any kind of response, though I will say that my best friend is in federal prison right now in Hawaii. He's been there for 3 years, more than 3 years, and he hasn't had a trial. He's been refused bail 8 times, and the atmosphere in the United States is not conducive to telling people good things about this plant. The attitude of the current administration is resistant to science. So I'm so wonderfully happy to have an opportunity to talk with all of you about cannabis versus climate change, because it's a global problem and it needs to be dealt with globally. And right now in the United States, we can't grow hemp here legally. You're more likely to harvest marijuana than you are to harvest your hemp. In fact, I believe there's a death sentence for a certain number of plants. 60,000 plants, I think, gets you a death sentence in the United States, from what I've heard. I'm not sure about that. But hemp is not illegal. It's never been illegal. It's actually essential. Excuse me, I'm going to have to put these back on. Can't see. It's an essential resource that was given to mankind by the Creator. I founded the California Cannabis Ministry when my son was born, because I'd been a cannabis scholar at that point for almost 20 years, and I recognized that there was a sacred dimension that is missing not only from the cannabis conversation, but from our economic systems, our relationship with natural order, and it's important for us to recognize that we were born, all of us, into a giant mistake. And that mistake induced essential resource scarcity on human evolution for 76 years at this point in the United States. But it's important to understand that increasing UVB radiation is no joke. The impact or the effects of increasing UVB radiation are many, and none of them are good. Immune suppression, genetic mutation, abnormal cell growth, and of greatest concern to me is the increased solubility of mercury and arsenic from aqueous solution. So what that means is the toxicity of the planet by the increased solubility of mercury, arsenic, and selenium compounds, which are also extremely toxic. And they're ubiquitous. We cannot avoid them. They're everywhere. Coal, for example, puts a lot of them into the atmosphere. In January of this year, the United Nations Environment Program published a report entitled Mercury, Time to Act. And in that report, they reference all of the different dangers of mercury and the different sources and concentrations and different parameters that are associated with mercury, and they do a fine job. But what they miss is they miss the increased solubility of mercury from aqueous solution due to the increasing UVB radiation. Now, in places like the South Seas and Antarctica, where the phytoplankton particularly concentrate and establish the foundations of the oceanic food chain, I personally just in my investigations found a solid week of UV intensity that was in excess of 60 on a scale where 10 is extreme. A week-long blast, if you will, of UV in one of the most sensitive and remote regions of the planet. But just because we don't see it happening doesn't mean that it's not happening, and it certainly doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect on us. The vastness of the conversation, the vastness of the cannabis conversation, the hemp conversation, brings me to the need for action. Obvious. We have a responsibility to future generations. I have a responsibility to my 6-year-old son, one-to-one, that demands that we coordinate our intelligence in deciding what to do and then doing it. And if somebody has a better idea for healing the planet, then I will work on their idea for free for the rest of my life. But in the 22 years that I've been doing this, I recognize cannabis as an essential and unique natural resource without which mankind will never establish sustainable existence on this planet. And we've proven that because we're on our way to extinction right now. And the trajectory that we've created isn't inevitable. We may still be able to pull it out of the unthinkable realm and put it back into a sustainable realm, and the sooner we start doing that, the less traumatic it's going to be. And we really need to understand that cannabis heals on many levels. It heals our bodies, it heals our minds, it heals our hearts, it heals our world, and it heals the planet, it heals the atmosphere. It is a godsend that was so important. God's first commandment was to grow cannabis. I'm not particularly biblical myself, but I do know that on the first page of the Bible, God is quoted as saying, the King James Bible I should say, God is quoted as saying, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed on the face of the earth."